Dr. Grishma, welcome to Dr. Diaries. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi.
Before we start off on how ENT as a specialization is and all of that, I want to ask some, very layman sort of question. That is, why ENT are one group? Why are ear, nose, and throat one specialization? There's so many other, body organs where they're just one, like lungs would have just one doctor, bones would have just one doctor. How come these three very different looking organs have one specialist?
In this ENT, nose is a central structure. Nose is connected to ear through eustachian tube, both the sides. And from behind the nose, whatever secretions are there in the nose will come into the throat. So the infections in nose can spread into the ear or into the throat. And also nose is connected to the eye, but it is a separate specialty. But because of these issues, a patient who has a nose problem can have ear problem, and a patient with ear problem can have throat problem. So as these three are interconnected, it is into a single specialty.
Okay. So, when I was trying to research about, ear, nose, throat, I came across a stat that is somewhere around that 6.4% of people are having conditions where they're losing their ear. And that number seems to be increasing, especially because of our day-to-day habits of, something that all ENT specialists would cringe on, using the cotton bud and long, prolonged usage of earphones and all that.
Headphones.
In your clinical studies and in your interactions with your patients, what do you think these days has become the most common reason of somebody maybe losing their ear capacity or listening capacity, and how much of it is actually related to today's lifestyle mainly?
So today's lifestyle, like software professionals are continuously using headphones or earphones and for prolonged hours, maybe 10 hours, 12 hours. So because of that, there can be hearing loss, and also because of the external noise while traveling, or because of crackers, or because of some loud music, pubs, all these things also cause hearing loss. Like when a sound crosses 120 decibels, it can cause sudden total hearing loss, sensory neural hearing loss. And in headphones also, if the person is using more than 60% of the volume for more than an hour continuously, then also it can lead to hearing loss. So all these are very important. If they're not following those things, like avoiding sound, continuous exposure, it can lead to hearing loss.
A lot of us are so used to keeping earphones on. They've become, the phone and the earphone have become such a
Common for listening to music, and while working, maybe throughout the day they keep on using headphones and earphones.
Yeah. And have you started to notice any trends around young children these days who are, because as children are growing, one thing we've seen is that almost every child these days is coming across with, they're born with like laptops and tablets and phones, in their
After COVID, I think because of the online classes, many kids got used to laptops, and now these days online tuitions are also going on, and many online platforms for learning certain activities, or because of that, kids are also habituated to using headphones and earphones, listening to music. So for them, they are also prone to hearing loss. Earlier it used to be like when we do pure tone audiometry, the hearing loss was approximately, the hearing level was approximately 10 decibels. These days, when we do pure tone audiometry for any other person who is normal, his hearing levels we find 15 to 20 decibels. So 15 or 20 is becoming the normal these days.
What is the audiometry trying to tell you? Like, what is the...
It will tell us the hearing level of the person.
Okay.
Like how good it is. If it is 0, it is very good.
Okay.
So, but 0 is like something which we don't see usually. It will be around 5, 10 earlier. When 10 years back, it used to be 5, 10 decibels level. But these days, when we do pure tone audiometry, we usually see that it is around 15 to 20 decibels for most of the people, normal person. The hearing level as such, any other normal person, the hearing level is at that threshold. So means gradually the normal hearing level is coming down because of the noise exposure. So once when we call hearing loss, when it is crossing 45 decibels or 50 decibels, we can make out that the person is not hearing. So when the normal hearing is around 20 decibels, so the chances of them losing hearing will be quicker when they use headphones or earphones continuously.
Wow. I think one thing that has come across very commonly is that things that we as common people are doing these days, right? We really don't know what is the lasting impact these things can have, right? And even, keeping on the same conversation of children, right? How much do you see a difference between, a young child these days who's coming to you with, sinusitis or some other problem? Has it, in your span of 16 years, have you started to see a increase in child problems, or, has it actually become better over time where, people are more careful, there's more care by the parents and all that?
Diagnosis, like we are diagnosing more cases, like parents are bringing kids to hospital at an early stage these days.
Okay.
And once we earlier, many kids used to have protruded teeth, mouth breathing, facial profile used to change. All these were very common. But these days, because of early diagnosis of adenoids, nose blockage, we are informing patients that they should get the treatment in early stage, so that kids will not have teeth alignment issues in future, and jaw development will be correct. So parents are also going for early treatment, and we see lesser deformities these days.
Now that we've spoken about children and all of that, speaking with ENT, there's nose and throat here that deals a lot with breath, right? And, previously in our conversation with Dr. Harshini as well, we were talking about snoring. And she said something very, alarming to us. She said how you would look at a patient who's sneezing during COVID, right? And how much of a red flag that is. She looks at somebody with snoring as that much of a red flag. So since your specialization is with nose and throat, right, and there's so much of your world evolving in this, right, how do you look at snoring?
Snoring basically is mostly ENT problem. Few patients will have lung issue also, but mostly because of nose blockage, either because of deviated septum or turbinate hypertrophy or sinus issues, or sometimes behind the nose, that is above the palate, there will be adenoids. So that can also block the airway.
Adenoids are?
Adenoids is like a lymphoid tissue which is behind the nose.
Okay.
Okay. So that can block the airway, and air will not flow freely, and there is certain turbulence because of that, and it will produce sound. So, and the uvula palate will also vibrate because of the turbulence, and that will increase snoring. So this is one of the reason. And then bulky uvula. Suppose the kundanal kantar kada, if it is bulky, then also there will be snoring, or even the person is lying down flat on his back, then the tongue may fall back. When the jaw is smaller than usual, the jaw length is less than usual, then also the tongue will fall back and it will block the airway. And there is epiglottis, which is a structure which mimics the shape of the tongue. If it falls back onto the vocal cords or larynx, then also the airflow will get blocked and the person may have snoring. So all this we'll have to assess. Once the air crosses vocal cords, it goes into the trachea and then into the bronchus and lungs. So then if the person has lower down blockage, he will get wheeze.
Okay.
When the airway is blocked above vocal cords, he will get snoring. So snoring mostly is related to upper respiratory tract. So we'll have to evaluate when a person comes with snoring or mouth breathing. Mouth breathing indicates that the mostly blockage is above the palate, because he is able to comfortably breathe through mouth. So we'll have to assess his nose and palate. So we'll do an endoscopy initially and check whether there is any deviation of the nasal septum, or turbinates are thick, or adenoids are present. And then after doing endoscopy, we will do drug-induced sleep endoscopy and sleep study. So in sleep study, we will know how much snoring, that is how many apneas are there. Is it very severe snoring or simple snoring? In severe snoring, when after few cycles, because of the resistance, airway resistance, the airway will collapse totally and he cannot breathe properly. person will go into apnea, that is total blockage of the airway, or hypopnea, which is partial blockage of the airway. That is it will block for 5 seconds. The air breathing will stop for 5 seconds in hypopnea, and breathing will stop for 10 seconds in apnea. Then we'll assess how many apneas and hypopneas the person has and which position it is severe, whether when it is in the right side or left side, or when lying on the back or in the prone position. So all this we'll assess in the sleep study, and also their heart rate. Because when there is a total blockage of airway, apnea, his heart rate will increase from 70 beats per minute to 115 or 120. So that will also strain his heart
Resting. Like,
during resting. So when they are sleeping, actually the heart rate should reduce to 50 or 60 per minute. But when a person has snoring, since the oxygen airflow is less when compared to any other normal person, his after every 4-5 beats, the heart has to pump extra time. So in a minute, it will increase by 20 or 30 beats depending on the resistance. So that increases the heart rate. And when there is an apneic episode, total stoppage of the airflow, suddenly heart rate increases drastically, and patient will wake up and his muscles will contract and open the airway. This is called apneic episode. This will strain the heart too much, and blood pressure can also increase. And over a period of time, because heart is working more during the time when it has to rest, its size will increase, and it can lead to infarction. That is, the blood vessels which are supplying the heart will also not be able to supply it adequately, because the muscle mass of the heart is increasing. So gradually over a period of years, like maybe 10 years or 20 years, the person may have cardiac hypertrophy and may progress to myocardial infarction, hypertension, other issues, pulmonary hypertension, then systemic hypertension. All these complications can be there. Then they will have this daytime dull feeling, lack of concentration, and sometimes they may have accidents while they're driving. All this is because of lack of proper sleep, because brain is not getting rest during sleep. Because every time there is an apnea, brain there is an arousal signal, and brain wakes up this person and opens the airway, and then again he goes back into sleep. So this thing happens continuously. So this will disturb the sleep cycle, which is very important. Every person who is sleeping during night will go through sleep cycles. At least he has to finish 4 to 6 sleep cycles. So when the person is traveling from stage 1 to stage 2, N1, N2, and before he reaches N3 and REM, he is awake again due to apnea. So again he goes to N1, N2, N3, and he's again awake. So the complete cycle of 4 stages is not completed. So daytime he will not relax, because in the last stage he will have the
most relaxing
stage will be there during that time. So most of them will have like dull feeling during the daytime.
So, have you started to notice, any major reason on, is it like people with overweight, obesity are the ones who are causing this, or is there something else that you started to notice?
Actually, some people because of obesity will have snoring, and for some people it is nasal blockage or airway blockage which leads to snoring and obesity, because they cannot do adequate workout because of nose blockage. When they are exercising, they'll become tired.
So it's the other way around also.
The way around also. They are always sedentary and they don't do much workout, and they tend to compensate by eating. Like during night, if they're not sleeping properly, daytime they're dull, and they try to compensate thinking that they're feeling weak and tired, and they try to eat more. And then they will end up having obesity, and that will increase their snoring problem and become cyclical, and they can never reduce the weight. So in these individuals, we cannot attribute always snoring for increased weight. We need to check inside the nose and throat if something else is blocking, and that is leading to these problems. So thyroid, if a person has thyroid and increasing weight, then also they can have snoring, or nose blockage and sedentary life, and they're increasing weight, and they can end up in having thyroid issues. So either way is possible.
Okay, so there's no real start point, but then once you're in it, it's a
We have to assess everything.
Yeah.
If a person is overweight, we have to ask them to reduce weight. At the same time, we have to check their nose and throat. And if those issues are also there, we have to correct that. So to reduce snoring 100%, we have to deal in multiple ways.
multiple ways.
So one procedure is not enough for everyone.
Yeah.
Mm.
The other, new word that I've heard a lot these days is something called as vertigo,
Mm.
right? My father himself was suffering from it, and he was normally healthy and all that, but then suddenly we saw he, basically couldn't stand straight, didn't know up from down, and it took, multiple visits to, general physician and then being moved to an ENT doctor to actually get him proper help, where we knew what to do at least, so that the next time the episode isn't as serious. The first time we got really scared. Have you started to notice a lot more vertigo patients, and what exactly is vertigo?
Vertigo is like person comes with sudden spinning of the surroundings, like they cannot stand properly. Everything around them starts spinning, not only inside the head, but the surrounding objects will start spinning. And they will have excessive sweating, and they will feel palpitation, vomiting sensation. That can stay for few seconds or for prolonged period, few minutes, half an hour. So depending on the condition with which they are affected, it can be for few seconds or few hours. So they're like basic conditions, like due to which commonly we see vertigo is like positional vertigo. There will be balance system has 3 canals, semicircular canals, and 2 central chambers. So these central chambers will have small particles
And these are in the ear.
inside the ear.
Okay.
Inside the ear. So these small particles, when they get displaced into these semicircular canals, they can stimulate a false impression of rotation, because usually when we rotate to the right side, our fluid inside the semicircular canals will also rotate. So it will indicate to the brain that you are rotating. But when the particles get displaced, even without rotation, or when you are rotating to right side, it will indicate that you are rotating to left side. This will create a false impression and confusion in the brain, and it will start spinning. So then this particle displacement is one reason, and then the fluid pressure inside the semicircular canals, if it increases, that also can cause vertigo. And electrolyte imbalance, sodium potassium imbalance.
Okay.
So
Okay.
and also apart from ear, brain causes like transient ischemic attacks, like which is a stroke for hand and legs, paralysis. Similarly, there, if it is affecting the ear region, it can cause vertigo, a transient ischemic, like blood flow is not proper to the nucleus of the ear, the nerve of the ear. Then also person can experience vertigo for few seconds or few minutes.
Is there any mother cause to this? Like something that, is common for, okay, this is the reason why vertigo comes in? Or is it like, it can happen to anybody at any time?
It can happen to few genetic issues also will be there. Few trauma can also trigger.
Okay.
And lifestyle, like and also certain infections.
Okay. So multiple
drugs also, certain like a patient is undergoing chemotherapy for cancer treatment. Certain chemotherapy drugs can also trigger vertigo.
Okay.
Because of destruction of these hair cells which are there in the ear.
Yeah.
That also can cause vertigo. So there are many reasons without evaluation. So we cannot say that this person has generalized this problem. But finally, balance system is inside the ear, and that can cause imbalance and vertigo.
Okay.
And it is controlled by the brain. So these 2 regions we have to evaluate when we are looking at a patient who has vertigo. So that's all. And we need to do video nystagmography and some basic tests like walking, stepping, to assess whether the balance system is good. And if the particle displacement is there, we can correct it very simply by doing Epley's maneuver in OPD itself.
So it's not a solution.
It has solution for certain conditions, and needs long-term treatment for certain conditions, and some cannot be treated. So there are different types of vertigo.
Looking forward, right? there is so much of technology that has come into the field of medicine, especially into surgery, right? And we also wanted to touch about cochlear implants and how that is changing lives of patients nowadays, right? Can you touch upon, maybe you can tell a patient story where, okay, this was not possible maybe 5 years before, but this patient is, lucky that they've come right at the time where, we're able to actually treat this. And then can you take us through a journey of, how it feels to be the person who's treated somebody and, seen a success?
Yeah. So usually these kids kids are born with profound deafness, both sides. If both the ears are profoundly deaf, they cannot develop speech. It's like most of the parents identify that child is not speaking at the age of 1 year or 1.5 year, but most of them think that gradually the child will speak. But when they understand that the child is not hearing, maybe at 2 years or 3 years, they bring to us. Then we counsel them about the cochlear implant. We assess everything, like we do their hearing test, brain evoked response audiometry. We do CT scan and MRI of the cochlea. And if cochlea is normal in structure, but functionally the hair cells are not working properly inside the cochlea, then we can do cochlear implant for the child. These children, after we do cochlear implant, like if we do the cochlear implant at a very early stage, like 1 year or 1.5, they speak normally like any other person. But when we do at 3 years or 4 years of age, below 5 years of age, their speech will not be perfect, but to some extent they can speak. So if we fail to do this cochlear implants during that time, the child will permanently remain as deaf mute. So
Even with the implant, even if you do an implant later,
after 5 years of age, it is not going to help much.
Okay.
Because the child will depend on the visual cues for analyzing what other person is saying. So the brain region which is allocated for vision, and each brain will have a specific region for vision, for hearing, for speech. So when we don't use certain region, it will be allocated for different regions so that they can compensate loss of this particular organ. So like a person with hearing loss and who cannot speak, if we do not do implant below 5 years of age, gradually vision will take over that region and the person will be very good in lip reading and identify the surrounding changes by vision. So gradually they'll become deaf mute and permanently remain like that. And even if we do implant at a later stage, will not help them.
So how much of your time basically has gone into counseling parents who are, not ready to put, a young child under the knife for surgery, or, how much scared they were for implants. And then when you take them through this journey, how are you also going to, as a doctor, treating is one part, and then actually talking to somebody about the benefits of treatment, holding hands of their, attendees is one entire part. How has that journey been for you?
So basically, once the child is identified and we diagnose them for this, diagnose that the child is profoundly deaf and he needs cochlear implant, we ask them to join therapy. And we tell them beforehand that this entire process is going to take around 3 years and they have to stay with us for 3 years. So we ask them to join in therapy. We straightforward don't do implant for these kids. We give them therapy for 3 months. During that time, they meet other kids who already have undergone cochlear implant. So they understand how how the child is able to speak with cochlear implant, and the difference between this child and that child, and also that the child is like normal person and the implant is not causing any trouble to them. And that they can take care of the implant. Otherwise, many parents will be apprehensive that if they fall down, the implant will injure their brain, or some other issues, some other apprehensions will be there. Like people outside will tell them many things. So these apprehensions will reduce once they are going to therapy. So that way we can, the child parents will get motivated by themselves and they will gradually be more keen towards cochlear implant. So, and these kids again will help some other kid getting motivated. So
Yeah.
it's like that.
Yeah.
So we do.
So
that.
this implant is basically, it directly hits the brain, is it? Like, I mean, it tries to go around the ear, or how does the cochlear implant work?
Basically, implant has two parts, the inner part and the outer part.
Okay.
So inner part is implanted during the surgery. Electrodes are inserted into the cochlea, which is a spiral. So there will be 22 electrodes which are completely inserted into the cochlea. And these electrodes, they convert the sound waves which are coming outside, the sound waves which you are receiving are converted into electrical signal and transmitted into the inner part.
Yeah.
That inner part transmit these signals on frequency basis to the particular electrode. And these electrodes transfer that sound into the cochlear nerve and from there into the brain.
Okay. Okay.
The electrical signal is transmitted into the brain.
Into the brain.
So
And
from
for
there
them, does it
go to
mimic the sound? Like, does it feel like regular sound, or are they
it will be little bit different, but person who is born deaf,
Yeah,
not
and they would not know the difference.
But a person who is already hearing with 1 year or has been hearing for a while, for them the quality may be little different, but overall they get adjusted to it very quickly.
Okay. Okay. I also wanted to, maybe go a bit more deep dive into the technology aspect of, how your world is rotating around with, surgeries being done at such a minute place, and, everything has to be microscope level, and, really have a clear vision of where you're touching and all that. How has technology helped you, whether it is clinical, in reading maybe reports, versus actually surgical equipment?
In doing cochlear implants,
Not just cochlear, even through this entire, in your entire world of ENT surgery.
Microscopes are always helpful. Like we can use both the hands in doing surgery, and intraoperative facial nerve monitors. Like when we are doing cochlear implant in small kids, and already they have some anatomical variations. That's why they are born deaf. They can have associated anatomic variations. So normally when we are operating, we know that the nerve is here and we have to proceed in this direction. But in an anomalous kid, when we are, though with the help of scans, we analyze everything beforehand. Sometimes minute changes, structural variations can be identified with the help of intraoperative nerve monitor. So the nerve monitor will help us locate the facial nerve, so that the posterior tympanotomy, which we do during the surgery, is just next to the facial nerve. So these monitors are very helpful. That is the latest technology which we use. And also coblation when we are doing pediatric adenoid surgeries. So earlier, 15 years back, when we were doing these surgeries, we were dependent on debrider mostly. Debrider is also very good technology when compared to...
Debrider used to...
It's like a equipment with which we remove the tissues.
Okay.
So that will remove the tissue, but there will be associated blood loss. So now coblation is the latest advance. I can share a video.
Sure.
That will prevent blood loss, and it's totally bloodless, and it is by plasma technology. We can remove the adenoids completely, and there won't be any recurrence also.
Okay.
So we can use it for tonsils and adenoids, and also tongue-based reduction, because tongue is vascular in snoring surgeries.
Yeah.
Like when the tongue is bulky and it is falling back, we can reduce tongue base with the help of coblation. If you are using any other equipment there is a chance that it is bleeding profusely, and since larynx is close by, the chance of aspiration, and also like we may not able to visualize things properly when there is blood around us. So coblation has been very helpful in removing certain vocal cord lesions also, which are deep down. So coblation technology is very good, and also balloon sinuplasty. So frontal recess or frontal sinus openings, which are very difficult to widen and may need skull-based drills to widen, that we can widen very simply by using balloon without much disturbance to the normal structure. So that is also a latest advance in ENT practice.
Since you brought up tonsils, right? there's this running joke as kids, right? Like tonsillitis, at the end of it, once the surgery is done, you get to eat a lot of ice cream, right? But what is this tonsillitis where all the kids at a certain age, I've seen a lot of young kids at a certain age getting, swollen tonsils. And what do the tonsils actually do, and how is it okay that, they can be removed?
So every kid will have tonsil. So when basically tonsil is a lymphoid tissue, it will build up the immunity towards the food items which we are taking. So like when and you after 6 months you start giving, apart from breast milk, you start giving Cerelac or banana or rice, whatever. So the child will, as they keep on eating that, the body child's tonsil will get adjusted to that by producing lymphocytes, which will detect that this is a normal substance, and they can have their intestinal tract will also detect that it is normal, and they do not react with that substance. So that is called tolerance towards that particular item. So some kids will remain intolerant to milk or certain things, that is they do not have immunity towards that, and they will start reacting whenever they take that, they will have problem or motions or whatever like that. So these tonsils help us in building up immunity. But after certain stage, they gradually shrink, maybe 3 years or 4 years afterward, later on it gradually shrinks, and it should reduce to grade 1 or maybe totally disappear. But if in
so they disappear on their own, basically.
Mostly reduce. Gradually it will reduce to grade 1 or less than that. So, but if for some person, if it is bigger in size, very big, and it is blocking the airway, or the frequency of infection itself is causing infection. There are many crypts in the tonsil. So in the crypts, if there are bacteria which are stuck, and the child is getting infection very frequently, maybe more than 4 times in a year, then the tonsil is a focus of infection. So in that case, we may have to remove the tonsils. Otherwise, by avoiding ice creams, cool drinks, and taking extra precaution, we can always treat the child conservatively. But in spite of taking all the precautions, if they are getting infection more than 4 times in a year, that means the tonsil itself is a focus of infection. Then we have to remove.
So we basically touch the basics of what ear, nose, and throat through different functions, right? One question that I'd like to sort of bring or wrap the whole podcast around is, for common people, whether it's children and adults, you can tell 2 different rules for both of them. What would you say, in the latest lifestyle and all, avoid this, don't do this, it's an ENT hazard, you don't know what you're doing, you might feel it's normal, but it's not. You can tell something for children that you're noticing, and then something for adults that you're noticing.
Children,
you can also say something encourageable also, something that probably they should do more.
For children, I think avoiding headphones, earphones is something which is important to protect ear. And continuous exposure to AC should be avoided. That also can lead to some upper respiratory tract infections. Shouting too much, avoiding vocal abuse. So that also will lead to voice related changes, and vocal nodules may develop. So these are common for children and adults also. Both of them should take care. So anything specific for adults, maybe using headphones continuously for prolonged period during office hours. They have to give break every 60 minutes. They have to give a break for 10 minutes, and the volume of the headphone should not be more than 60% of the maximum volume. If it is crossing that, they have to cut down the time they are using by 50%. So that is a 60-60 rule. That is 60% of the volume, maximum volume, for not more than 60 minutes. So that they have to follow. And the rest is same, like avoiding AC and maintaining the pitch. They should not speak continuously. When they are speaking continuously, they need to take break and drink water. And they have to maintain that vocal hygiene also. And avoid late night dinners, because that also will cause gastric reflux and can lead to voice change. So, and avoid smoking, alcohol, tobacco chewing. because that will lead to oral submucous fibrosis or cancer. So these are the things which the young adults and children should avoid. And exposure to loud sounds, speakers, or when they are going to pubs, sudden exposure to loud sounds. And in weddings also, they should not sit near the speaker.
Mm-hmm.
Crackers, avoiding loud noise exposure during Diwali or these festivals.
All right. I think there's a lot to talk about within your word, and we'll catch up again for a part 2 of this podcast. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.